r/nosleep. Posted by you/horror_writer_1717. I'm a security guard for hire. My last job nearly killed me. Part 1. I'm a security guard who works for a company that hires me freelance to whoever needs. So I've had times when I would go to work and have absolutely no idea where I was going. Sometimes I'd be patrolling football games on Friday night. Other times I would have to fill in for someone who called off sick at a warehouse, or one of the other places the company contracted out to. So, there wasn't a lot of stability in my job, but when you're the night watchman, you're the night watchman. There's not a lot of activity, you're just kind of there to check the locks and make sure nobody breaks in. There was a large antique store in downtown that used to be an old department store that went out of business. Back when such things existed. It sat vacant for years, decades even. And then someone bought it and turned it into an antique store. They sold things on consignment, so it was actually many stores within one. The security company I worked for was called because there had been things going missing from the store. They decided it was worth it to have someone staying there overnight to make sure no one was breaking in. So, I was given the job. It wasn't tough. I would bring my lunch in and put it in the refrigerator, then I would walk around the store. It had an upstairs and downstairs, and at nighttime, it was a little creepy. Any place that you walked on the upstairs floor, the boards creaked. Downstairs was completely different. It was a basement, but it didn't really have that musty basement smell. With all the antiques there, it had that antique smell, which is kind of hard to explain. It was like old memories. After doing the job for a while, the owners really came to appreciate the job I did. Nobody was breaking in, nothing was getting moved, and I was very clean. I didn't leave anything behind. In fact, sometimes if I saw a mess on the floor, I would clean it up. So, the owners talked to the company and requested that I work there full time. And that was fine with me. It was interesting for a while. I would go through different parts of the store that had different things. Each section was like its own little store. At night, if I was bored, I would go over and pull one of the used books off the shelf, and that's the book I would read for the night. When I'd put it back, I would make a note in my notebook of what page I ended on, and the next night I would get the book and pick up where I left off. There were other times when I would look through the one shop's records collection looking for ones that I wanted to buy or that my friends were looking for. I would call them and tell them it was here. Not only was I guarding the place, but I was also bringing in more business. I would walk through and see what was in each shop as I patrolled. And if I knew there was something a friend was looking for, I'd call up and tell them about it. I was very happy with my job, and then came the change in weather. During the summertime, it was great because no matter how hot it was outside, once I would get down to that basement, it was always nice and cool. Once fall came around, something changed, something became different. There was a different mood in the air. During the summer I would go around, and on days that I was bored, I would have conversations with the different objects, the different dolls, mannequins, and things like that. I would even name them. "Hey, Fred, how's it going tonight?" I say in passing to the mannequin dressed in a gentleman's suit from the past century. I would chuckle as I walked away. It was just something to keep me interested and keep me on my toes. When September rolled around, the owners of the shop started moving different merchandise in for the fall season. Every night I'd come in and a few things would be different. I would familiarize myself with them and see what they were. Maybe it would be a new doll or a statue. I would give it a new name, but aside from merchandise changing, there was something in the air. The mood was changing too. I don't know if it had to do with the change in the seasons or the merchandise, but it became less of a lighthearted, carefree attitude. Especially once the Halloween decorations started moving in. I have nothing against Halloween. I'm just as up for reading a scary book as the next person, but some of the things were downright weird. There was a ventriloquist dummy that looked super creepy. Not only were the new things moving in, but sometimes those new things would change position from one night to the next. It seemed odd to me that the shop managers would switch things from one shelf to another. I don't know if it had something to do with the display, that somehow it would be spotted and sold more easily, but it seemed to be happening a lot. Not just one shop owner was doing this daily switcheroo, but several of them. It was a mystery, but I had plenty of time to figure out a mystery while I was sitting around every night in between patrols. It was shortly after that I heard the first sound. Now mind you, I sit in total silence all night while I'm guarding the place. I don't listen to music because I want to keep my ears open for anyone messing with the doors. By this point, I'd come to know the sounds this store made. There were times when the heat turned on and the pipes would creak and pop. There were times when the floors would creak because of the change in temperature. The first night I heard it, it freaked me out so badly. After months of working here, I knew exactly when every pop and creak will happen and what caused it. This one was different. I was sitting there reading a book when all of a sudden I heard a creak directly over my head as if someone had just taken a step above me. One step and that was it. I froze. I slowly put my book down and looked up. The ceiling didn't provide me with any answers. So, I quietly crept out of my spot and started up the stairs, pulling out my flashlight. The place was semi-lit with security lights during the night. It was easy to see to get around, but there were still dark corners, so the flashlight came in handy. I made it part way up the steps and flashed my light around trying to spot someone as quickly as possible. I focused my light on the spot where I'd heard the sound, but there was nothing there. I slowly crept around the side trying to come to that spot and head off any angles where someone could escape. I kept my light trained on the spot so I would see if they peeked their eyes around the corner or if they suddenly darted off in a different direction, but nothing happened. As I got closer, my apprehension grew. I switched my flashlight to my non-dominant hand, unlocked the taser, and had my hand on it. "Whoever you are, you're trespassing," I said to the air. I didn't get any response back. The creaks being caused by my own feet were creeping me out as well. I came to a spot where there was a display, and I knew that was exactly where I had heard the footstep. I stood there, mesmerized, looking at the little pumpkin face decoration and smiling at me. I darted around the corner and flashed my light at the only place the person would have had to hide, but there was nothing there. I suddenly felt very exposed. The thought crept into my mind and refused to leave. Someone's here and you can't see them. I looked around behind the display but there was no one. I did a slow circle around all the other displays in that general area and found nothing. You know how when you're watching a horror movie and you know something terrible is about to happen and it doesn't? It makes you that much more terrified of what's about to happen next. That's a rabbit hole that I was slowly tumbling down. The longer it took me to find someone, the more apprehensive I became. I did a slow walk through the entire upstairs, paying close attention to the dark corners, but there was absolutely nothing out of the ordinary. The only thing I could find different was once again a few pieces of merchandise had moved positions. Was somebody sneaking in and moving stuff around just to creep me out? I was mystified as to why. I mean, sometimes kids do stupid stuff like that, but how would they get inside? I double-checked the locks on all the doors, and they were secure. After I did my round, I wasn't satisfied by any means. I would have much rather found something than nothing. Because something you can chase away. You can yell at it, you can tell it you're going to call the police. But with nothing there's not a single thing you can do. I went back downstairs feeling helpless as I did a round through the basement, also finding nothing. I sighed, attempted to shrug it off, and went back to reading my book. I can't say I was fully focused on reading. The rest of the night my eyes kept darting around, waiting to see someone jump up at me and say, "Gotcha." But that didn't happen either. Let's just say that I was relieved when morning came that day. I was very happy to go home, however, my mind never got to full resting mode. That day as I fought off the sunlight to try to sleep, my mind kept drifting back to, did I really hear that, or was it just my imagination? I'm not easily rattled. I used to work as a corrections officer, so I'm used to dealing with difficult situations. But this was bothering me because it was a situation where there seemed to be no situation. And that bothered me because that meant it was all in my head. I went back to work that night and was on edge the entire night. I did more rounds than usual. I tried to stay diligent of dark corners. I shined my flashlight around a lot more than usual. It was like my entire body was keyed up in anticipation of the same thing happening again. But it didn't. Nothing happened. I wasn't sure if that was better or worse. The night after that I went back to work and tried to settle into my normal routine, mentally laughing it off at the fact that I got so upset over nothing. That night, once again, I was sitting downstairs after having completed my first round and was reading my book when I heard the footstep. This time it wasn't just a creak of a board, I heard an actual footstep, like a boot had stepped on the floor. I instantly felt pins and needles all over my body. I slowly set down the book, picked up the flashlight, and started upstairs. Like the last time, I moved slowly and cautiously, trying to flank the position so that anyone who was there would not be able to get around me. "Whoever is here, you're trespassing on private property," I said, panning the flashlight around. "If you don't leave, if you don't show yourself, I will call the police." Nothing. The only sound was the fading echo of my own words. I approached the same display where I had heard the creak the last time. Once again, I found a colorful display of pumpkin decorations staring me back in the face, but no person, no boot, no nothing that could have possibly made the sound. The only thing that was different this time was one of the pumpkin decorations was swaying back and forth a tiny bit as though someone had bumped the display. My search of the upstairs proved futile and fruitless. I went back to my book feeling rattled but also annoyed. I was going to catch whoever was playing this stupid trick on me. It was a mission. The next night went off without a hitch. Even though I was keyed up, I was ready to catch whoever was doing this, but there wasn't a thing out of the ordinary. The night after that I didn't hear a footstep. I heard a dozen footsteps running rapidly, heading toward the far end of the store. I bolted out of my seat and ran down to the far end of the store in the basement, and took the stairs 2 at a time. I could hear as I ran the footsteps and I were running in the same direction. I knew I would catch him at the exit door. This was it. He was mine. I made it to the door before the footsteps did and stood there, my hand on my taser, my flashlight up and ready. I was going to catch him. And then the footsteps stopped. I stopped right before the top of the staircase. "I know you're there," I said, pointing the flashlight up the stairs. "Step out and let me see you." Nothing. Dead silence. "I've had it with this game," I said. "Step out now. I'm taking the safety off my taser. If you don't, I will tase you." Nothing. "Fine, have it your way," I said as I bolted up the stairs. The footsteps had stopped right there. The person should have been standing right there. But there was nothing. There was no place he could have hidden. It was all open at the top of the stairs. He couldn't have walked away. I would have heard the floor creaking. He couldn't have gotten past me. I would have seen him. It was like he vanished if he was ever there. I stood there, dumbfounded. What the hell is happening to me? I panned the flashlight all around, but there was no place he could have gotten to before I got to the top of the steps. The steps weren't wooden, they were made of stone, so my coming up wouldn't have made enough noise to cover the sound of him running away. I started worrying about my mental well-being. I knew I'd heard the sounds. I knew I'd heard someone running upstairs. There was no doubt in my mind. Or was there? I hadn't found anything. So, either I was hearing things, my mind was playing tricks on me, or it was something else. I decided I needed proof. So, the next night when I came to work, I sat my cell phone on the counter, and of course, I heard nothing. When you're anticipating something happening and it doesn't, it's frustrating. The next night I sat my phone on the counter and read my book, after doing my normal rounds. As soon as I heard anything, I turned my phone on video and hit record. I heard footsteps running toward the rear entrance. I followed them. After another fruitless chase, I returned to my counter and watched the video. All it showed was the ceiling, but I was only listening for the sound. I heard the steps on the phone. I was happy that I could hear them. It meant I had proof that I wasn't going crazy. Then I heard my own footsteps running away, chasing after them. I left the video running as my mind started wandering. Okay, now I have proof, but proof of what? I thought. Suddenly I heard a voice. It was quiet, harsh, and raspy. It said 4 simple words. "Why are you here?" I spun around, looking for whoever had just spoken, but no one was there. "Who is it?" I screamed. "Stop doing that." Nothing. I looked around for hidden speakers or anything that might be doing this. I looked under the counter, over the counter, through the counter. Nothing. I heard myself walking back and picking up the phone, then the video ended. I stared at the phone for a long moment, then started the video again. Same thing, the footsteps, followed by me running after them. I was about to turn it off when the voice sounded again. "Why are you here?" I rewound the video 10 seconds and listened again. "Why are you here?" I rewound it over and over, hearing the voice each time. Then I turned it off and did a slow circle. The only thing around me was the antiques. Old books and statues, buttons of failed politicians, and old porcelain figurines. There was no one there. I found myself at a crossroads. Do I treat this as a prank and ignore it? Or do I let my curiosity drag me down the rabbit hole to find out what was really going on? I set the phone on the counter, turned it to video, and hit record. "I'm here to protect the merchandise," I said. "Why are you here?" I looked around and saw nothing out of the ordinary. I let the video record for another minute, then shut it off and played it back. I heard my own voice ask the question, then after a few moments of silence, I shook my head at my own stupidity. Of course, that wasn't going to work because there was nothing there, I thought. Just then I heard the voice. "You don't belong here," it said in a low, raspy voice. My shaking hand reached for the phone. At that moment I completely agreed with the voice. I didn't belong here. My knees were shaking. Chills ran up and down my spine. I spun around trying to find the mystery voice, but it wasn't there. I nearly dropped the phone. My hands were shaking so badly when I rewound and listened to the video again. The voice was still there. I laid the phone down on the counter and started another video. "I have to be here," I said, trying not to stammer. "It's my job." Then I let the video record for another minute. When I rewound and played it, I got my answer. "Leave and never return," it said. I started another video and said, "And what if I do return?" When I played it back, I wish I hadn't. The only word it said was, "consequences." I suddenly felt cold, like the temperature in the room had dropped below freezing. I didn't try to ask any more questions after that. I picked up my phone and went upstairs for the rest of the night. When the owners came in the morning, the woman asked me if I was feeling okay. "You look pale," she said. "Like you've seen a." "I'm fine," I said, interrupting her. "Just a little tired." "Well, go home and get some rest," she said. "Thanks to you, we're having a record quarter." I smiled weakly and opened my mouth to say something, then thought better of it. "I'm glad I can help out," I said, then excused myself and drove home. It took every ounce of fortitude I had to step inside the store that night. When I turned and locked the door behind me, the click had a sound of finality. I walked slowly through the upstairs on my first round, suspicious of every nook and cranny. Even the friendly faces on the dolls and festive decorations took on a sinister look. It was as if the entire store was watching me. By the time I reached the stairwell at the far end of the store, my nerves were shot. I had my flashlight out and hand on my taser. For some reason, the stairwell light was off. I flicked it on and descended the uninviting stairs. When I reached the bottom, the lights were off in the basement as well. I flicked them on and for a heartbeat, I swore I saw something dart out of the light and into a shadow. My senses, already on high alert, went into convulsions. Before I knew it, the taser was in my hand and the red beam was dancing around, bouncing off the myriad objects on the shelves. My feet felt like they were encased in concrete. For a handful of minutes, I stood frozen to the spot, waiting for anything to move, praying it wouldn't. My mind screamed at me. "Leave. Get out of here. It's not worth it." I entertained the thought and then came to my senses. "It's just my imagination is all," I thought. "There's nothing down here I haven't seen 100 times. I tried to smile and chuckle, but it didn't quite feel right. Half of me wanted to listen to my mind's prodding and bug the hell out. I finally overcame my paralysis and started my round in the basement. I walked, trying to act nonchalant, but eyes darting back and forth looking for trouble. The taser hadn't made it back into my holster yet either. When I got to the spot where I thought I had seen something move, I took a long look. There was nothing out of the ordinary, except an overweight porcelain clown that was on the floor instead of the second shelf where it usually sat. "Are you causing trouble, Tubbo?" I said to the clown. Thankfully, it didn't answer. I walked away feeling a little better for trying to lighten the moment. I stepped up to the books to choose which I would read tonight. As I perused the titles, one stuck out at me, literally. It was as if someone had only put it back in halfway. I pulled it out and looked at the title, Cape Fear. "Nope," I said, putting the book back. "Not up for anything scary tonight." I looked around at the other books and picked out a Dave Barry collection. But I couldn't pull it off the shelf. It was as if the book was glued to the spot. I shrugged and tried to pick another humor book, but it was stuck too. I tried others, but they were all stuck. It was the strangest thing. I tried a romance but couldn't get it loose. I tried several other genres, but none would come off the shelf. I was mystified. Out of curiosity, I picked out a horror novel and it came out in my hand. I put it back and picked another. It came out as well. After trying many, I found the only books I could get off the shelf were horror. I backed away from the strange phenomenon and continued my round. I just won't read tonight, I thought, trying not to let the weird bookshelves rattle me. I made my way to my counter and eyed it with suspicion. Maybe I should sit somewhere else tonight, I thought of my favorite spot. With no book and nothing to do but stare at the many objects that surrounded me, I found myself doing more rounds than usual. Hearing the floorboards creak under my own feet was little consolation. My nerves were still dancing on the edge of a knife. I went back downstairs to complete my round. At this point, I was intentionally trying not to notice things. I walked past one display and froze as I caught something out of the corner of my eye. I backed up and looked at the display. The clown that I had spoken to the last round looked exactly the same as it had, except for one important detail. It was back on the second shelf. I know it was on the floor, I thought, my mind racing. I know it was. I stared at the clown, his porcelain smile full of mischief. I tried something crazy, hoping no one would ever find out about it. I pulled out my phone and recorded the clown. "Are you the one causing all this trouble?" I said, aiming the camera at it. I left the camera recording for an additional minute to give time for an answer. Then I stopped recording and started watching. I heard my voice ask the question, then nothing. I waited for the answer, but there was none. I stared into the glossy eyes of the clown for a long moment. Then I tore my gaze away and continued the rest of my round. Someone is messing with me, I thought. Then I slowly reconsidered. Or is it something? I looked back toward where the clown sat in his display. I sat quietly at my counter, trying not to have a nervous breakdown. My thoughts were tumbling through my mind so quickly that I lost track of time. I glanced at my watch and nearly an hour had passed. I got up and did my next round, but when I got back to the basement, the clown was once again on the floor. I pulled out my phone, mumbling, I know he wasn't there the last time. Sure enough, I played the video and the clown was sitting on the second shelf. Ha, I said, pointing at the clown. I caught you. I turned the phone around and showed the video to the inanimate object. Then realized just how insane my actions were. I slowly turned the phone around and shut it off. I walked away and sat back down at my counter. The next round I tried ignoring the clown but found my eyes drifting toward its display. But instead of finding it once again on the shelf, there was another surprise. It was gone. I looked all around the display, but it wasn't there. I frantically searched the nearby displays but couldn't find it. Beads of sweat formed on my forehead. I did a slow pan around and felt as if it was lurking behind any of the 1,000 objects in the store. I pulled out my flashlight and searched every dark corner. I slowly made my way through the basement, not finding any sign of my quarry. I approached my counter and there it was, on top of the counter, pretty as you please, staring at me. It was all I could do not to scream. I refused to touch it. I stood there, transfixed, staring at this impossible scene. And then my mind woke up and sent me very specific instructions. Run. It said. Get the hell out of here. I bolted for the stairs and took them two at a time. I tore through the store and fumbled with the keys to unlock the main door, dropping them twice just like in every horror movie I'd ever seen. Finally, I managed to open the door and step out. The cold, late October, air slammed into my face making me screech to a halt. I stood there looking at the streetlights and the pre-dawn gloaming. The sidewalks were empty, making me feel totally alone and on my own. I took in several slow, deep breaths of the frigid air. My mind began to slow. What the hell just happened? I asked myself. But I couldn't come up with an answer I wanted to accept. I'm a former corrections officer, I thought. I've dealt with people who've tried to kill me, throw things on me that should never be thrown. I've done countless cell extractions, and yet here I am scared out of my mind by a toy. I shook my head in wonder, then turned and went back inside, locking the door behind me. 2 steps in I could feel the difference. There was a heaviness in the air. A stillness that was disturbing. My bravado was evaporating with every step. Keep it together, man, I told myself, looking at my watch. Only a few more hours, then go home and get some sleep. I came around the edge of the stairwell and started down the stairs when my foot caught on something and I went sailing out into the air. By sheer miracle, my hand shot out and grabbed the handrail, keeping me from tumbling down the stone stairs and ending up with at least a concussion, if not a quick trip to the morgue. My body swung around and slammed into the hard metal railing, knocking the breath out of me. I hoped I hadn't broken any ribs, but there was pain radiating from my side. After a few minutes, I caught my breath and slowly stood, looking back up the stairs to see what I had tripped on. There sat the clown. I'm a security guard for hire. My last job nearly killed me. Part 2. Any amount of courage or denial left in me evaporated. I stood there, halfway down the steps, pain in my side, staring at a porcelain doll and fearing for my life. I climbed the stairs and sat on the top one, across from the clown. There was no way I was going to touch it, but there was no way I was going to let it out of my sight either. The next few hours were a blur, as the store became a carnival funhouse. I heard footsteps, music, crashing, and even sounds I couldn't identify. But I refused to take my eyes off the clown. My bladder screamed at me, telling me I hadn't taken my mid-shift bathroom break, but I refused to take my eyes off the clown. When the owner unlocked the door, she found me in the same spot, sitting at the top of the stairs, staring at the clown. "Are you all right?" she said, coming over to me. It took me a moment to realize she was real. "Yes, I'm fine," I said, staring at the clown. "I just wanted to buy this thing." She looked back and forth from me to the clown. "I have a friend who collects these," I said to her unasked question. Sure," she said. "You want to bring it over?" "Actually, I was wondering if you could take it and gift wrap it for me," I said, my eyes glued to the clown. Of course, she said hesitantly, picking up the clown and carrying it over to the counter. I struggled to my feet, nearly falling down the stairs again as my numb legs struggled to function. I shook out the pins and needles and waited for my balance to return before walking over to the counter and paying for the doll. "Thank you very much," the owner said with her cashier's smile that didn't quite make it to her eyes. "Are you going to be okay?" I looked at the brown wrapping paper that enveloped the clown and smiled. "I'll be fine, thanks." I stepped out into the cold air and walked to my car. The key slipped out of my hands as I tried to unlock the door. The second time around I unlocked it and got inside, putting my parcel on the passenger seat. I turned the key in the ignition to start the car and nothing happened. I sat back inside. Then I slapped the brown paper wrapper and tried again. The car roared to life, and for the first time in a while, I felt in control. I drove away from work, ending up on a dirt road I used to visit when I was a dumb teenager. I knew the road ended at a quarry, and I wasn't going very fast, but when I pressed the brake, nothing happened. I kept going straight toward the edge of the cliff. I tried the brakes again but still wasn't stopping. I was slowing down because my foot wasn't on the gas pedal, but that wasn't going to stop me before hurtling over the edge. There were trees lining both sides of the road, so I knew if need be, I would hit a tree before careening over a cliff to my death, but I wanted to save my car if possible. The moment of truth was approaching. I was almost to the edge. I grabbed the emergency brake and yanked up with all my strength. Dirt flew as the car slid sideways and came to a stop. I took a deep breath, put the car in park, and turned off the engine. I stepped out and looked down at the edge of the cliff 3 feet in front of me. I sighed and reached back inside the car to grab my brown package. I unwrapped it and looked into the eyes of the clown. "Sayonara, sucker," I said, then threw it over the cliff and watched as it fell in slow motion hundreds of feet and shattered against the rocks. I looked at the tiny pieces scattered among the rocks with disappointment. At least I could have seen some evil vapors floating up, or the thing burst into flame when it shattered, I thought. I guess I've watched too many horror movies. I got back in my car, and it started on the first try. I smiled as I drove home and slept like the dead until my alarm went off and it was time to get ready to go to work. I sang in the shower, I sang along with the radio, and I was still humming a happy tune when I got to work. It was the happiest I'd been in days. I did my first round with a skip in my step. Even coming to the display where the clown used to be couldn't put a damper on my spirits. The empty space on the shelf where it used to sit made me smile. I came to the bookshelf and was happy to pick a book for the evening now that I would be able to enjoy reading again. I did my best to ignore the supernatural ramifications of the previous week as I chose a book. I reached for the Dave Barry book again, but it wouldn't budge. I tried another book, but it wouldn't budge either. I reached for a horror book, and it came out in my shaking hand. I slowly panned around, looking for anything. In the back of my mind, I half expected the clown to jump out, wielding a knife, and start chasing me. When that didn't happen, I floundered, not knowing where to look next. I went to my counter and sat the phone down on record. "Where are you?" I said, looking around. "What are you?" I waited for a minute, then stopped recording and listened. After I was done talking, I waited for the answer. "Why?" said the raspy voice. "So you can do to me what you did to the clown?" I stared at the phone with dismay as if it was whatever was saying this. I started another recording. "How do you know what I did to the clown?" The voice answered with a harsh chuckle, then said a single word: "Prepare." I started another video and said, "Prepare for what?" But the voice was silent. "Prepare for what?" I said on another video, leaving more time. No response. I guess it sucks to be me, I thought ruefully. I plopped down on my chair and thought about what could be worse than the last few days of living in fear. My happy mood was gone. Now all I felt was hopelessness. The night dragged on for what felt like an eternity. There wasn't a sound, not a hint of anything out of the ordinary. The silence drove me to the brink of insanity. I waited all night for something to happen, but nothing did. When morning came, the owner was brimming with excitement. "Happy Halloween," she said, as though Halloween spirit was overflowing out of her. "That's today?" I said. "Of course. I think I might need to take tonight off." "On Halloween?" she said, looking distressed. "When all the tricksters are out looking to do no good. Tonight's when I need you the most." I looked into her pleading eyes and sighed. "Of course, I'll be in tonight," I said. Her face immediately lit up and she became brilliantly happy. "Oh good, I'm so glad." I went home and tried everything I could to get some sleep. I even took a sleeping pill. But nothing could get my mind to shut down. I couldn't stop thinking about what could possibly happen. All this trouble I'd been having, and then add on top of that, the fact that it was Halloween night was too much. I couldn't fathom what was about to occur. In the end, I got maybe an hour of sleep. When I got up to get ready for work, I was completely frazzled. I put my taser and flashlight on my belt, then looked in the drawer and saw my snub nose .38 sitting in its ankle holster. I picked it up and stared at it for a long time. The ramifications of taking it with me were huge. Was I prepared to face the consequences of what would happen if I used it? After a few minutes, I made my decision. That night on my way to work I passed dozens of kids in colorful costumes running cheerfully from house to house having the time of their lives. I wondered if any of them would ever have to face a moment like I was about to. When I turned the key in the door to lock myself in my prison of antiques for the night, the click had a note of finality. My mind had been running through a list of potential disasters that could happen that night, and nothing had not made the list. I started my first round upstairs and it was totally uneventful. You'd think that the silence would be comforting, but it was quite the opposite. My eyes darted back and forth searching for where the attack would come from. Once I got downstairs, I was jolted into full panic mode. There was new merchandise that must have come in today. It was 3 life-sized mannequins that were dressed in Halloween costumes. The hairs stood on the back of my neck and my anxiety level jumped to 11. I stayed as far away from these things as possible. I wanted absolutely nothing to do with them. I was tempted to call the owner right then and say I quit. I desperately wanted to take a book off the shelf and read to take my mind off of the stress, but I knew that all it would let me take was horror. I sat at my counter after my first round was done. My leg bounced nervously and my hands sat on the counter, shaking. I didn't know if I was heading for a heart attack or not. I sat there, dreading my second round, waiting to hear anything unusual happen like it'd been for the last week, but there was nothing but silence. Dreadful silence. It was like the silence of a volcano that was quietly building pressure until the eruption, and no one ever sees it coming. That's what I was waiting for, the eruption. Second round came and my walk through the upstairs was disturbingly quiet. When I got downstairs, I noticed 2 of the 3 mannequins were still where they were supposed to be, the third was missing. Please can't I just have one peaceful night? I thought. As the thought rattled through my brain, I heard a rustling. I looked over to the side and the third mannequin was stepping toward me. I froze in shock. The impossibility of what was happening seemed to ricochet off my brain. It refused to penetrate. The mannequin took a step toward me, then another. Finally, my mind got out of denial mode and into full red alert mode. I pulled out my taser, put the red dot in the middle of the mannequin's chest, and pulled the trigger. The surge of electricity didn't faze it. It kept stepping toward me. I didn't know what to do. As a last resort I reached down to my ankle and pulled out the .38. The mannequin started waving wildly and making strange noises. It terrified me beyond anything I'd ever felt before. It was a mere half-dozen steps away from me when I fired. I hit it square in the middle of the chest. There was a small hole in the front, and something flew out the back. The mannequin stopped as if I had just hit the pause button. It slowly toppled forward, and when it hit the floor, pieces flew off. I noticed there was clothing underneath. I also noticed the large red hole in the back of the plastic. My curiosity overwhelmed my fear, and I stepped forward to discover what had happened. I looked down and oozing out of the red hole was blood. I hesitantly reached for the mannequin and rolled it over to find the faceplate had broken off and I was staring down into the eyes of the owner of the store. "No!" I screamed. She tried to say something, but blood gurgled out of her mouth, making it barely audible. I leaned closer and she spoke again. "Just wanted to give you a little scare," she said weakly. "Happy Halloween." I knelt there for a long moment before I came to my senses. I reached for her neck to feel for a pulse, but there was none. Most of her body was still covered in the mannequin plastic, but there was nothing I could do. There was no resuscitation that would work. I had shot her in the heart and there was nothing to resuscitate. I stared at her dead body for a long time. And then I got up and went to my counter, sat, and put my head in my hands. After a few minutes, I pulled out my phone, turned on the video recorder, and said, "Are you happy now? Is this what you wanted, for me to destroy my life out of fear?" I let it record for another minute, then turned it off and hit play. I heard the sound of my own voice desperately asking the question, then silence. I recorded another video. "Answer me!" I screamed. "This is what you wanted. Say something. Gloat. Do something. Anything." I played it back, but there was still silence, maddening silence. I looked around in desperation, trying to see what was different when my eyes landed on an empty spot on a shelf. The ventriloquist dummy was gone. Someone must have bought it during the day. I stared at the empty spot in unbelief. Was that it? Was that what was causing all this grief, all this madness? To test the theory, I went back to the bookshelves and pulled out a Dave Barry book. It slid off the shelf into my hand. I looked down at it and realized whatever had been terrorizing me was gone. I should have been relieved. I should have been happy. Then I looked over and saw the arm of the dead woman with a hint of the puddle of blood beneath her. I knew it had destroyed my life. It didn't matter that it was no longer here. For a fleeting moment I thought about cleaning up the mess and burying the body on the outskirts of town somewhere she would never be found. But she didn't deserve that. I couldn't do that evil thing to her after all she had done for me. I sat down and typed this out on my phone so that others would know the story. So that this woman wouldn't have her death be a mystery. I also wanted to warn others of the dangers of unknown things. Don't play with these things. Don't challenge them. Get away from them before they ruin your life as I've ruined mine. After typing in this story, I realized there was still one thing left to do. I went upstairs and broke into the office. I dug through the receipts for the day and found the one for the ventriloquist dummy. Fortunately, the woman who had bought it paid with a check, and the owner hadn't had time to take it to the bank yet. I pulled out my phone and took a picture of the check which had her home address on it. I got in my car and drove straight there. All the colorful munchkins had abandoned the streets to go home and work on their stomachaches. It was after midnight when I quietly broke into the woman's home. I pulled out my flashlight and searched the entrance hallway, then not finding it, moved to the parlor. There were quite a few antiques in the room. I looked around slowly trying not to miss what I came for. Finally, I saw it sitting on a small table near the far end of the room. I went to it and picked it up. It was much heavier than I expected. I struggled to balance it so it wouldn't fall to the floor and wake the house owner. I turned to leave and nearly ran into an old woman standing in front of me. "Who are you and why are you holding that?" she said in a tone that conveyed more curiosity than alarm. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I have to take this," I said, struggling to keep it in my arms. "There are many other items in this room of greater value," she said, gesturing around. "Why that particular one?" "I don't really want to say, ma'am. And I don't want to be standing on the cold floor in my robe watching a stranger take my property, yet here we are. Would you believe the warranty ran out and I need to take it back to the shop?" She glared at me like a teacher I had just told the dog ate my homework. "Okay, the truth is this thing is evil," I said. "Evil?" she said. "Whatever would give you that idea?" I sighed, then quickly went through the recent events, hitting the highlights. "And you still have these recordings?" she said. "Yes, they're here on my phone," I said, setting the dummy down and pulling out my phone. "Would you mind if I listened to them?" I shrugged and played the videos one by one as she listened with such curiosity that she barely moved. When they were done, she stepped back with a pensive look. "Interesting," she said. "Now do you see why I have to destroy it? And you were the only person in the store when these recordings were taken?" "Yes." "So it was speaking directly to you?" "I believe so. Why?" "There are two erroneous assumptions you made about this object and myself," she said. "What are those?" "First is that this object is evil," she said in a mannerly tone with just a hint of teacher in it. "Inanimate objects are neither intrinsically good nor evil." "But this thing," I said, pointing at the dummy. "Yes, it did things that made you react a certain way, but that still doesn't define it as evil." I looked dubiously from her to the dummy and back. "The second assumption you made was that I was some poor innocent victim, that I had no idea what this thing was, or what it's capable of," she said with a gleam in her eye. "That I haven't been searching for this object my entire life." My eyes went wide with realization. "And now that you have it, what will you do?" I said in a voice that sounded detached and distant. "Prepare," she said in a low raspy voice that sounded so much like the voice on the recordings it gave me chills. I reached down to tie my shoe, then sprung up, pistol in hand, and shot her in the forehead. Her head snapped back, then slowly drifted forward. She gave me a look of surprise that turned into sheer rage. "You think you can?" she said before collapsing to the floor. I watched as she bled out onto the ancient carpet. "That's gonna leave a stain," I thought. I looked down at the ventriloquist dummy, then looked around the room at the many other objects. Each of them looked old, just like the dummy. I felt a closeness in the air, like a pressure building. From the front hall, I heard a crash. I felt the dummy drawing my attention. Suddenly I felt surrounded and helpless. I ran to my car, feeling better as soon as I hit the cold outside air. I stood there gasping, sucking in lungfuls of fresh air, then I turned and looked back at the house. The thought of all those things being sold at auction to unsuspecting victims was more than I could bear. In for a penny, in for a pound, I thought, digging through my glove box and finding a lighter. I stepped back into the house, feeling stifled as soon as I did, and found as many papers as I could. There was a stack of old newspapers in the foyer. I crumpled some up and threw the rest of them in the middle of the parlor floor. I lit a handful of crumpled newspapers and threw them in the corner. Then I lit another as a large glass cabinet suddenly tipped over, nearly crushing me. I dodged, then lit some more newspaper and dropped it beside the cabinet. Objects started flying. Small ceramic figurines darted through the air toward me. Some missed and hit the wall behind me, others hit with surprising force, cutting me, but only increased my resolve. I continued to light bunches of paper and throw them around the room while flames climbed high, licking the ceiling as they devoured the curtains. The entire room was ablaze and in chaos. Inanimate objects became deadly missiles as the flames consumed the room. I backed out of the disintegrating room, staring at the ventriloquist dummy engulfed in flame, then ran to my car and watched as the house collapsed in on itself. I breathed a sigh of relief as I sat in my car and posted the rest of this story for everyone to know before I go away. I hope I've saved at least a few innocent victims.